Hi everybody, Steve here. I want to make a video which is a little bit different than I've done before. This is not the original painting. This is a oversized print. The original painting, this watercolor called Sunrise Creek, I did it almost 20 years ago, and it was about 12 by 12 inches. And this signed and numbered print is about 15 and a half by 15 and a half inches, so it's a little bit bigger. And I thought, I can't show you how I did this because I didn't have video cameras or anything back then, but I can at least show you some close-ups. So I'm just using my iPhone here, and it does do this irritating thing where I zoom in and the color changes. So as you can see, it's a very warm type of image, a lot of yellow, a lot of layering, and if I zoom in too much, I'll just show you what happens. All that yellow goes away. So this iPhone is kind of weirdly compensating as I zoom in. That's actually more what it looks like. You can see the water has some yellow, and then it changes to a bluish violet color. Let me just try to give you a little bit idea of my process. And if you've been doing watercolor for a while, you probably have some ideas as to what I did. The sky here was done first, just multiple washes. One layer of yellow, let it dry, another layer of yellow, done wet into wet, big brushes, not very much color all at once. This is something that I want to demo in a long form video, which I haven't gotten to yet. And I apologize if you're trying to figure this stuff out, but it's just a whole bunch of washes of relatively thin layers done one on top of the other over a period of days, because each one has to dry. So ideally you could do maybe 20-30 layers in a day or two. Depending on if you use a hairdryer and all that stuff. But that's done first. Then everything else is painted below there. In fact, let me zoom in really close. You can actually see, if I zoom in close enough, you can kind of see where I probably had some kind of tape here. And when I pulled it off, I had this just white paper, and I could paint everything down below. And again, the color gets really weird when I zoom in too close. It gets all the warm yellows just go away. But the ground is all done in layers, and it implies a lot more detail than is actually there. I was actually at this point in my watercolor painting career, I had just done some oil paintings, and believe it or not, this to me was a little bit of loosening up. I didn't do a lot of real specific detail in the grassy area, which is actually just a lot of dry brush. Here, let me zoom in. Again, the color gets all weird, but you can see it's just a lot of scumbling. You know, where you push the brush up against the paper, and I'll do it down here. You're really rough, and you use that dry brush technique. The water was done. I'm not sure. I don't think I really needed to do any masking around the edges because I did the water first, and everything around the water was so much darker that if it bled a little bit, it was going to get covered up by the darks. I think that's what I did. So it was just, if I did this today, and I think this is how I did it almost 20 years ago, I used a relatively large brush that I could still control, like a round number 3 maybe. Maybe it was even like a filbert or a flat. And I think I wet this whole area down, and then I went in with, while it was still wet, I went in with a little bit of blue, a little bit of violet, a little bit of yellow, but each one being a separate layer probably, if that makes sense. So the sky was done first, the water was done first, and really the sky could have been done, and while it was drying and the whole thing was flat, I could have also worked on the water. I don't know if that's what I did, but that would be a more efficient use of time. And in the very background, that atmospheric perspective, I actually used a little bit of gouache, and it shows up, even though this is not the original. You still get the idea that I used some opaque, pale, kind of a bluish gray color in the background to imply the distant trees that were obviously far away. And over here, again, the color gets all weird when I zoom in, but I want you to see what I did with the sun. There's tiny little brush strokes of orange and yellow that give you that intense little spot of the sun breaking through. This was actually a morning scene that I photographed just on slide film. I didn't have digital back then. This was actually outside of Nashville, and it's very humid there, so you get a lot more of these misty sort of scenes, which I really like. And when I find those kind of scenes here in Wisconsin, I often try to get out there and photograph it when I can. Now, when you look at the tree branches, you'll see that it's just a lot of little, brush strokes. I'm not doing anything really fancy. I'm using a good brush, a Kolinsky Sable brush, and just taking my time. The evergreen tree in the middle, which is, I don't know, I think it's a cedar. It looks like I painted 90 million needles, and I didn't. I didn't paint any needles at all. It's just a bunch of clumps of color. When I zoom in close, you can see there's really not that much to it. And if I remember correctly, because I wanted this to get really dark, the darkest areas needed to be dark and flat. I didn't want them to be shiny. I used a little bit of gouache as well. And then when you see some of these branches on the top, let me use the brush to point to them. I use a little bit of gouache there. And this one tree trunk here, which is lighter, I think I may have masked. No, I don't think I did. I think what I did was I just used a little bit of gouache to give it the highlights. Again, these colors are really goofy when I zoom in close, but when I back up, you can kind of get the idea of how I did that. I think these were actually stone steps that went down to this creek, which I really liked. This had kind of the look of some old historic, almost medieval kind of a scene. But it's just a scene off the road I found when I was driving around Tennessee about 20 years ago. I don't know if this is helping you to get an idea of my technique. I hope it does. It's just a lot of layers, a lot of work, and I will be making more videos where I show you that process in all of the steps. But I'm always working on other projects, so I apologize if you've come to my channel and you're waiting for me to do more. I'm going to get there as soon as I can. Thanks for watching, and I hope you find this helpful. Talk to you again.